Hi there. Oh, hello, and welcome to Angkor. I don't usually meet anyone when I'm walking around the Cambodian countryside, so I was kind of surprised when he came up behind me. Where am I going? Oh, there's a 13th century Khmer Temple just down the path. Let's go together and see if we can find it. Searching for Khmer temples is so exciting. I never know what I will find just around the next bend or through the next clump of trees. It is so quiet and peaceful here, and it is such a nice day. You know, I wouldn't be at all surprised if we could even hear the gods chanting up in the heavens. What have we here? From the bicycles ahead, it looks like we are not the only ones at this temple today. These bicycles probably belong to people cleaning the temple. Since the Cambodian government began protecting them, the old temples of the Khmer, especially those around the old capital of Angkor, have received regular maintenance. Do you know much about Khmer temples? This is a small one, about 10 meters wide, and it only has a single inner chamber. Because of the annexes on its 4 cardinal points, it has a cruciform shape as viewed from the top. The basic form of the Khmer temple, however, is a simple square sanctuary topped by a tower, and all Khmer temples developed from that, no matter what their size. Khmer temples were not built where they are randomly, but were designed and positioned according to strict Indian religious principles. After choosing an appropriate piece of ground, the architect, who was well versed in Hindu or Buddhist religious theory, first built a mound of earth, either short or tall, to raise the temple slightly off the ground. This was perhaps not only to signify the temple's importance, but to identify it as an emulation of Mount Meru, in Hindu and Buddhist religions, the home of the gods. For the same reasons, mountaintops were prime locations for Khmer temples. If a mountaintop was not handy, however, a lower elevation would do, and if the temple were built on flat land, they would construct a small mound out of soil. The mound was often made of dirt excavated from the surrounding moat. On this mound was built a low platform for the sanctuary. This platform was made of hard material, often sandstone or laterite, and steps leading up to the sanctuary were placed on one or more of its sides. Centered on this platform was the sanctuary building. Early Khmer sanctuaries were small, square or rectangular buildings made either of brick or wood. But after the late 10th century, sandstone became the preferred medium. The wooden sanctuaries, of course, are no longer standing, having decayed long ago. Because of their durability, many of the brick and sandstone sanctuaries, however, still exist. Mortar was not used in Khmer brick temples. Instead, a vegetable glue, the formula which has been lost to time, held the bricks together, and it was so strong that often it was the brick itself that failed, not the glue holding them in place. Atop the sanctuary was a stepped tower that was built in several stages. These tower segments decreased in size with elevation, thus giving an illusion of height, a trick of the eye perhaps meant to not only give the temple outline a mountain-like shape, but also to inspire awe and perhaps a bit of godly fear in the populace. Generally, there were 4 stages to the tower, which, with the sanctuary, made 5 segments. As Khmer temples were filled with religious symbolism, these 5 components perhaps represented the 5 peaks of Mount Meru. Topping the temple tower was an amalaka, or capstone, that was frequently shaped in the form of an open lotus flower. The lotus is an important symbol in Hinduism and Buddhism, and it is often seen carved on Khmer temples. Representing enlightenment, purity, rebirth, eternity, and many other things, it is associated with all their major gods. On each face of the sanctuary was either a true or a false door, with the main entrance to the sanctuary generally facing east. Inside the sanctuary was a large empty space, and between the tower sections were corbel arches, making the walls gradually come together, so at the top of the tower the space was nearly closed. Between the tower and the sanctuary was a wooden ceiling, which created a small room for the idol, which was either a Buddhist statue or a Hindu statue or linga, the latter often being placed on a yoni. Yoni could be either square or round, but they always had a channel for the discharge of holy water. The outside of the sanctuary often had a face through which the water flowed, much like a fountain, for collection by the populace. Although Khmer temples look very plain nowadays, there is growing evidence that they were richly carved on their exteriors and painted, both inside and out, with colorful designs. The most important of a sanctuary's designs were around its doors. Standing next to the door frames were colonnettes, which, in the pre-Angkorian period, were round in cross-section, but in the Angkorian period becoming octagonal. Bridging the gap between the colonnettes were the lintels, which, like the door frames and colonnettes, were always of sandstone. Next to the colonnettes were pilasters, and between these rose the pediments. In brick temples, these were often made of brick also. With a gradual reduction in size, this sequence was repeated on the various steps of the tower, the doors of the tower in all cases being false. In the pre-Angkorian period, the outside of the sanctuary's walls were covered with carvings, which are known as flying palaces. These are the only possible representations we have of early Khmer wooden temples. In the Angkorian period, these flying palaces were replaced by niches containing standing female deities called devatas. Not all Khmer temples had devatas, but in the ones that did, devatas were major components of temple design, standing next to doorways, windows, and on corners. Placed on the edges of sanctuary roofs were various antefixes, which were either small freestanding figures, which presumably portrayed various deities, or miniature versions of sanctuary buildings. Antefixes were common fixtures of Khmer temples until at least the 10th to 11th centuries, and many can still be seen standing where they were placed 1,000 years ago. Topping the sanctuary was often a metal finial, or spire, an ornament shaped in the likeness of the trident of Shiva, the supreme god of the Hindu pantheon of gods. But more decorations were necessary to complete the Khmer temple. Unlike sandstone, brick was not conducive to carving, so for this purpose, the outside of brick sanctuaries needed to be covered with a coating of stucco, which is a whitish coating similar to plaster. At times, one can still see the remains of this stucco coating on their ruins. It is not known for certain if this stucco covering was painted, or was left as a white medium for sculpted artwork. Flecks of paint have been found still clinging to some Khmer figures, however, so if Khmer temples were built similarly to those in India, be they either made of brick or sandstone, they must have been covered with carvings, which were no doubt richly painted. There is little doubt that the colorful sight that greeted those passing through the entrance gates of Khmer temples during the years of the Khmer Empire would have been quite breathtaking. There are two basic kinds of Khmer temples. Those built on or near the ground are called flat temples. These either have a single sanctuary or multiple sanctuaries with the primary deity worshipped usually being either the Hindu god Shiva, or if this were a Buddhist temple, either the Buddha or a Bodhisattva. The second kind of Khmer temples were built atop tall platforms and are called temple mountains. These temple mountains were often, but not always, designated as the king's state temple and his mausoleum. Though single sanctuary temple mountains were common in Khmer architecture, they were also sometimes arranged in a group of 5, in reference to the 5 peaks of Mount Meru. The central sanctuary was the largest, and was dedicated to the king, with the smaller surrounding sanctuaries reserved for his relatives. So, even though the major religions of the Khmer were Hinduism and Buddhism, there was also a cult dedicated to the worship of ancestors. As time went on and technology improved, Khmer temples grew ever larger. The once small square sanctuary began to enlarge, and as we have seen in the introduction to this video, its expanded transepts now gave the sanctuary more of a cross shape, as viewed from above. Both open and false windows with lathe-turned balusters enhanced the sanctuary's appearance and added to its decorative diversity. Although existing before, mandapas became more common, adding not only more space to the sanctuary, but also expanding its functionality. The sanctuary, however, never lost its importance and was always located at the center of the temple compound. In addition to the sanctuaries, the temple also contained other buildings. One of the most ubiquitous was what is called a library, though in truth, its true functions are uncertain. There was always at least one library, and sometimes four, placed near the sanctuary platform and generally facing it. Libraries in the early Angkorian period were often made of brick or sandstone, but later, laterite was often substituted, possibly because of its availability, ease of extraction, and cost-effectiveness. Laterite is a soft clay when quarried, but when dry it becomes hard like stone. Because of its rough surface, it is not well suited for decoration. This shortcoming restricted its uses to utilitarian projects such as bridges, foundations, and the cores of temple buildings. But sometimes libraries and even entire sanctuary buildings were made from it. Demarcating the holy precincts of the temple was an enclosure wall. At first, there was only a single wall, but after the 9th century, temples were often surrounded by concentric enclosure wall rings. At each cardinal point on these enclosure walls was a gate or gopula. In east-facing temples, the east gate was the largest, as it was the main entrance to the temple. The west gate was generally small and was rarely, if ever, used, as the west, the direction of death, was considered unlucky in Khmer society. Depending on how many enclosure walls a temple had, there were one or more moats surrounding a temple as well. As enclosure walls possibly represented the chains of mountains surrounding Mount Meru, moats may have symbolized the oceans, rivers, or lakes which were supposedly located near this sacred mountain. Small ponds placed near the temple may have symbolically served the same purpose, but in reality they were likely used as water sources or for bathing facilities for temple staff. At the outer periphery of temple enclosures was sometimes an earthen embankment and/or a wooden palisade. This series of walls, moats, and palisades must have given many Khmer temples the look of fortifications rather than temples, and indeed, some of the modern names of some Khmer temples have the prefix Bante, which means citadel or fortress. Through the entrances to all these concentric rings ran the temple's pavements, which were either simple dirt paths or sandstone or laterite blocks. Outside the temple perimeter, these pavements ran through nearby settlements, and one can still sometimes see the entrances to cross streets, which ran through these settlements from the main temple pavement. The final main type of Khmer religious buildings, called long halls, were generally placed within a temple's inner enclosure. Like libraries, the purpose of long halls is unknown, but like libraries, they were probably multi-use structures, functioning as shrines, storage facilities, or meditation chambers. Sometimes these long halls were set close together in a ring, an arrangement which eventually melded them into a wall-like structure called a gallery. Because stone religious structures were not for residential purposes, the staff did not live within the temple itself, but in wooden houses either just outside the temple compound or in the nearby village or villages which supported the temple with supplies and labor. So the Khmer Temple was not an autonomous unit, but was integrated financially and socially into Khmer society. Religion and state were one. The basis of Khmer religious thought and the pillars of the Khmer financial system were Brahmanism and Mahayana Buddhism. And when the temple system based on those ideologies collapsed, so did the economy. In the religious upheaval of the 14th and 15th centuries, the religious foundation of the Khmer changed to Theravada Buddhism, a branch of Buddhism more for the common people than for the elite. This was the harbinger of death for the Khmer Empire. It is a misconception that the Khmer Empire was conquered by foreign armies in the 15th century. Nothing so dramatic. By the time invading armies arrived at the gates of Angkor, the city was already nearly abandoned. Angkor did not fall, but died a natural death. Because of changes in religion, economy, and the rise of new foreign powers to the west, Angkor became untenable, and as a consequence, the Khmer government simply went home, back east to the Mekong River, the safe haven from which it had originally sprung, to restructure and begin anew. I hope you now have a better idea about how Khmer temples were built, how they represent an art form in their own right, and how important they were to Khmer society. Though now only shadows of their former selves, Khmer temples are still magnificent. Thanks for watching, and see you next time at Angkor.